Isabella Laurent fired him at 8:47 in the evening, in front of 32 employees, under the cold white light of the Laurent Diamond Tower lobby. She did it calmly, the way someone might cancel a standing lunch reservation. No apology, no hesitation, no particular interest in the man's face. She simply held out her hand, waited for him to drop the security badge into her palm, and said the words that ended 11 years of quiet, reliable service in under 10 seconds. Marcus Reed stood there and took it. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He placed the badge in her hand, nodded once, and walked toward the revolving glass door while the rest of the staff looked anywhere but at him. Outside, the November rain had already soaked the sidewalk dark. He stood under the overhang for a moment. Not because he was upset, but because he had forgotten where he parked. He was thinking about Lily's tuition payment, due Friday, and whether the leftover rice in the refrigerator would stretch to tomorrow's lunch. Marcus Reed was 45 years old. He had worked the overnight shift at Laurent Diamond Tower for 11 years, arriving each evening at 7, departing each morning at 6, walking the same marble floors in the same worn black boots, eating the same homemade lunches. He packed himself in a blue thermos and a dented metal container. His car was a 2009 sedan with 212,000 miles on it and a passenger side mirror held in place with electrical tape. His daughter Lily was 10 years old, sharp-eyed, and possessed of an alarming ability to detect when her father was lying about being fine. He raised her alone. Her mother had left when Lily was 3, and Marcus had not wasted a great deal of time grieving it. He had a child to feed and a world to keep safe and very little patience for self-pity. The men and women who worked alongside him at the tower, the younger guards, the front desk staff, the tech contractors who rotated through every few months, rarely spoke to him beyond what courtesy required. He was too quiet, too old, too unimpressed by the building's glittering lobby and its revolving art installations and the framed photographs of billionaires shaking hands in places Marcus had never been. The other guards sometimes speculated about him the way people speculate about things that do not quite fit their understanding of the world. Derek had once suggested that Marcus was probably just a guy who had run out of better options. A woman named Tasha, who worked the front desk evening shift, thought he was probably sad, in the way that people who eat alone are assumed to be sad. The IT contractor who rotated through on alternating Tuesdays had asked Marcus once if he had always wanted to be a security guard, in the tone of someone asking whether someone had always wanted to be a parking meter. Marcus had said he had wanted, at various points in his life, to be a marine biologist, a structural engineer, and a chess grandmaster, and had ended up being something else entirely. The contractor had laughed. Marcus had not clarified. What they did not know, what no one in the building knew, because Marcus had never mentioned it, was that he had spent 14 years before this job doing something entirely different. He had been part of a federal protection unit assigned to high-value asset transport and facility security at the national level. He had protected armored convoys, advised on vault design, and once, in a building not unlike this one, talked a panicked armed man down from a ledge using nothing but patience and a very calm voice. He had retired from that life early, after Lily was born, because some things mattered more than field work. He had taken the night guard position because it was local and stable, and left his days free for school pickups and homework and bedtime stories. Nobody needed to know what he had been before. He was just the old man with the blue thermos. But Marcus saw things. That was the habit that never left him. He noticed the camera on the third-floor east corridor that had been angled wrong for 6 weeks, creating a blind spot roughly 4 feet wide near the service stairwell. He noticed the loading dock door on the building's north side that failed to latch properly when the temperature dropped below 40 degrees. He noticed, in the week before Isabella Laurent took over operational control of the company from her father, that someone had begun routing IT maintenance requests through an unfamiliar vendor code small enough to miss, obvious enough to someone who had spent years reading irregularities the way other people read headlines. He had flagged it. He had put it in writing, walked it to the facilities manager, and been told, with the practiced patience of someone managing upward, that it was probably just a billing reclassification. He had let it go. He had written it in his own notebook instead, which he kept in his jacket pocket, because some habits die even harder than others. Isabella Laurent was 29 years old and had inherited more than a company. She had inherited a reputation, a board of directors who did not entirely trust her, a father who had stepped back but not away, and a building full of people who were watching to see whether she would flinch. She did not flinch. She was precise, relentless, and had the particular kind of intelligence that processes information very quickly and occasionally mistakes that speed for comprehensiveness. She had spent 3 years working in asset management in London before her father's health declined, and she came home to run the family business. She was good at it. She was also, in the way that many brilliant people under enormous pressure become, somewhat blunt about the things she considered inefficiencies. Old systems, old habits, old men standing in lobbies eating homemade lunches and writing notes in paper notebooks. The morning before the firing, Marcus had stopped her in the elevator. He rarely did this. He understood the hierarchy of the building and respected it in the way someone respects a fence, acknowledges it is there, knows what it is for, and crosses it only when something on the other side genuinely requires attention. He told her, quietly and without drama, that the vault system had a gap in its secondary authentication loop, and that if the building's new AI surveillance network went fully live before that gap was patched, there would be a window, brief but real, during which the vault's manual override could be triggered without biometric confirmation. She had looked at him the way someone looks at a child who has just offered an unsolicited opinion on international monetary policy. She thanked him. She did not write it down. The meeting the following evening was titled, on the official calendar, Security Infrastructure Modernization Review. Isabella stood at the front of the conference room on the 14th floor and explained, with the fluency of someone who had prepared the presentation twice and slept only 5 hours, that the building was transitioning to a fully automated surveillance and response system by the end of the quarter. The new system used machine learning to detect anomalous behavior integrated with a real-time response network, and had been installed by a firm with an impressive client list and a very clean website. The human security staff would be reduced. Several positions, including the entire overnight rotation, were being reclassified or eliminated. It was, she said, simply the smarter approach. Marcus listened from his position near the door. When the floor opened for questions, he raised his hand. He said, without any particular emotion, that machines could not read instinct, that the system being described relied on pattern recognition, which worked beautifully when the threat behaved predictably, and failed entirely when someone had taken the time to study and spoof the patterns. He said this plainly, the way he said most things, without apology or performance. Someone in the third row laughed, a short, involuntary sound, quickly suppressed. Isabella's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes did. She told him she appreciated his concern. She then told him, in front of everyone, that his services were no longer required, effective immediately. He asked if he could finish the week. He said it quietly. She said no. He asked again, not for himself, he explained, but because his daughter's enrollment fees were due on Friday, and the final paycheck timing mattered. Isabella Laurent looked at him for a moment, and whatever she saw apparently did not change her calculation. She said the payroll team would process his final check according to standard protocol. He nodded. He removed his badge. He walked to his locker, retrieved his thermos and his jacket and his notebook, and left the building through the lobby, while 32 people watched the floor. A young man named Derek, who had been with the company 8 months and considered himself several cuts above night shift work, said under his breath, just loud enough, that the old man had finally retired. 1 or 2 people smiled. Most did not. Marcus walked to his car in the rain. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. He was not devastated. He was not even particularly angry. He was calculating, the way he had always calculated, factoring in what he knew, what he had seen, what still felt unresolved. The van near the loading dock on the north side had been there 3 days running, always after 7, always gone before 6. The man who had come in twice as an IT contractor had used a vendor badge that Marcus, out of old habit, had run through the building's internal system during a slow Tuesday night. The badge was registered, the vendor was real, but the man's eyes had moved the wrong way when he walked the east corridor, not the casual scan of someone doing a job, but the careful, measured look of someone counting distances. Marcus had written it in his notebook. He had not had time to escalate it further before the meeting. He started the car. He pulled out of the lot. He drove 2 miles north toward home, listening to the rain on the windshield, and then the radio broke through a music set with a clipped, urgent bulletin. An active security incident had been reported at Laurent Diamond Tower. Multiple armed individuals. Evacuation in progress. Police units responding. Marcus stopped at a red light. He sat there through one full cycle, red, green, red, thinking about Lily at home with the babysitter, about his final paycheck, about the vault gap he had described in an elevator to a woman who had not written it down. He thought about the van near the loading dock. He thought about the contractor with the wrong eyes. He thought about the IT vendor code that nobody had looked at. He thought about the server room on sublevel 1 and what it contained, and what would happen to the people who worked in the building. Marie, at the front desk, the janitor on 6, the young man in accounting, all of them, if the company they worked for ceased to exist because someone who had the keys handed them to the wrong people. Then he made a U-turn and drove back the way he had come. He had told Lily once, when she was 7, and had asked why he kept working in a place where people were sometimes rude to him, that the people being rude were not the only people there. He had said there were also the woman at the front desk, who kept a photograph of her grandchildren in her uniform pocket, and the young man in accounting who always held the elevator, and the janitor on the 6th floor who sang quietly to himself while he worked. Lily had thought about this and said that seemed like a good reason. Marcus had agreed. He thought about it now, as he parked 3 blocks from the tower and moved quickly through the rain toward the maintenance entrance on the building's southwest corner, a door that did not appear on any public schematic, that accessed a tunnel running beneath the east wing to the service infrastructure hub on basement level 2. He knew about it because he had spent 11 years learning every inch of a building that everyone else in it had long since stopped seeing. The tower was dark, except for the emergency lighting long red-tinted strips along the floor level of each corridor, casting everything in the amber and crimson of a developing photograph. The main power had been cut cleanly. Not a failure, a surgical disconnection, the kind that required advanced knowledge of the building's power routing. The AI surveillance system, fully live as of that evening's launch, had been fed looped footage, a technique that required knowing exactly which servers to access and which timestamps to mirror. The elevators were locked at every floor. The stairwells were controlled. It was, Marcus recognized as he moved silently through the basement service corridor, an extremely well-planned operation. 8 people, from what he could assess through the building's emergency intercom nodes. He had the frequency on his personal radio, a habit he had never bothered to break. 8 people with military-grade communications and equipment who knew the building's layout with a specificity that could not have come from public records alone. The diamond exhibition on the event floor had descended into controlled pandemonium within the first 90 seconds. The group had entered through 3 simultaneous access points: the freight elevator, the fire corridor on the east side, and the service entrance on level 2, moving with the coordinated efficiency of people who had rehearsed this particular sequence many times. The guests, mostly hedge fund managers and private collectors and one minor European aristocrat who would later give a very dramatic account of the evening to a financial magazine, had been herded into the center of the room and told to sit. No one had been harmed at that point, which was itself a message. This was a professional operation, not a chaotic one. And professional operations moved faster when people cooperated, and slower when they did not. The group leader had stood in the center of the event floor after the room was secured and said, to no one in particular, and everyone at once, that what was about to happen would take approximately 40 minutes, and that anyone who remained calm would leave the building uninjured. Then he had turned toward the vault corridor, and the rest of his team had moved like water down a slope, fast, purposeful, following the path of least resistance through a building they understood better than most of the people who worked in it every day. The lobby had been cleared. Most of the event staff and guests had been moved to the third-floor atrium, which the group was using as a holding area. The diamond showcased Laurent Group's private exhibition of a collection valued at $500 million. The evening's official purpose had been the obvious target. But Marcus had stopped trusting obvious things a long time ago. He moved through the service corridor, climbed a maintenance ladder to the second floor, and let himself into the HVAC access passage that ran parallel to the east corridor. From there, he could hear them. Radios. Footsteps. The precise, unhurried sound of people who believed they controlled the space. He found the first person who needed him in the elevator shaft between floors 2 and 3. A young woman named Priya, who worked in guest relations and had been trapped when the system locked. He talked her down through the manual access panel, kept his voice low, got her to the stairwell, told her to go down and stay in the basement utility room until she heard police. She looked at him like he was a ghost. He moved on. He found an injured kitchen worker named Carl on the 4th floor, bleeding from a cut on his arm, where he had caught a door edge in the chaos. Marcus used his jacket to apply pressure, got Carl to the same utility room, checked his pulse, told him he was going to be fine. Carl said, with the focused sincerity of someone who has recently been frightened, that he believed him. Marcus appreciated that. On the 6th floor, he found Gerald, the senior vice president, who had been in the lobby during the initial sweep and had managed to conceal himself in a supply closet behind a rack of event linens. Gerald was 61 years old and had a mild heart condition and had been sitting in the dark for 22 minutes by the time Marcus found him, which was long enough for a man of Gerald's age and disposition to do a significant amount of thinking about his life. Marcus sat beside him for approximately 90 seconds, checked his pulse, confirmed he was stable, and told him where to go and how to get there. Gerald grabbed his arm before he could leave and said, in a voice that was rougher than his usual conference room register, that he had always known Marcus was something more than what he let on. Marcus said he appreciated that. He said Gerald needed to move now. Gerald moved. The building at night under emergency conditions was a different animal than the building Marcus had spent 11 years walking. In normal operation, it was layered and logical floors organized by function, corridors mapped by traffic flow, every space calibrated for efficiency and presentation. In the dark, with the power cut and the emergency lighting throwing everything into red-tinged shadow, it reverted to something older and more architectural: concrete and steel and pipe, the skeleton beneath the glass and marble skin. Marcus moved through it the way he moved through everything, without hurrying, without wasting motion, reading the space as it was rather than as it was supposed to be. He was aware of where each member of the group was, roughly, based on the radio chatter he was filtering through his earpiece. 2 on the event floor managing the civilians. 2 moving through the east corridor toward the server room access. 3 working on the vault door on sublevel 1. 1 and this one troubled him most, moving independently through the upper floors in a pattern that suggested he was not following the primary operation plan. He had by then understood 3 things with reasonable certainty. First, the group had inside assistants the level of operational knowledge required to cut the power this cleanly, spoof the cameras this precisely, and move through the building this confidently pointed to someone who had either worked here for years or had been given detailed intelligence by someone who had. Second, this was not purely a diamond heist. Diamond theft at this scale attracted immediate international attention, required complex fencing networks, and created evidentiary chains that were very difficult to break. Experienced operators preferred cleaner targets. Third, the vault they were moving toward on sublevel 1 contained, in addition to the diamonds, the primary backup server array for Laurent Group's offshore client financial data, account structures, transfer pathways, liquidity positions for clients whose combined net worth exceeded the GDP of several small nations. That server array, in the wrong hands, was worth considerably more than $500 million and left no physical evidence. It could simply vanish into encrypted transfers before anyone knew it was gone. Marcus keyed his radio to the frequency he had identified as the building's emergency management channel and spoke. He said who he was. He said what he knew. There was a long pause, and then a woman's voice came back, controlled, tight, trying not to sound afraid. and said his name like a question. Isabella was in the building's operational control room on the 12th floor, which had its own independent power cell and had not gone dark with the rest of the tower. She was with two members of the executive team and a security technician named Ross, who had been attempting, without success, to restore camera access for the past 40 minutes. She had watched the AI surveillance system, the future of the building's safety, the centerpiece of her modernization plan, sit completely inert, while armed men moved through the floors below her. She had watched a director named Franklin take a bullet to the shoulder when he had tried to reach the emergency phone in the East Lobby. She had watched her staff cry. She had watched Ross's hands shake over his keyboard. She had listened to one of her senior vice presidents, a man named Gerald, who had been with the company for 18 years and liked Marcus Reed considerably more than he had ever said, out loud, turn to her and say, with the quiet of someone stating a fact rather than making an accusation, "Marcus warned you." She had not responded. She had nothing to say. The certainty with which she had operated for the past 3 weeks, the brisk confidence, the clean logic of her decisions, the absolute conviction that old systems needed replacing had begun to feel, in the red-lit silence of the control room, like something she had mistaken for intelligence, when it had really just been speed. When Marcus's voice came through the radio, she pressed the transmit button and said his name. He answered. She felt something she had not expected to feel, which was relief so complete it was almost physical. She asked him, after he had briefed her on what he knew the 8-person team, the power cut, the camera loops, the likely target on sub-level 1, why he was there. She asked it the way someone asks a question when they already half know the answer but need to hear it anyway. He said, without any particular drama, that there were people in the building who needed help and he was in a position to help them. She said that was not what she meant. She said she had fired him. She said she had been unkind about it. He paused for a moment, and she heard the distant sound of the building's ventilation system and her own breathing. He said that saving lives mattered more than pride. He said it the same way he had told her about the vault gap in the elevator, plainly, without performance, like a man stating the temperature outside. She pressed her lips together and said nothing for a moment because there was nothing useful to say. Ross, who had been listening to this exchange over the shared channel, looked at his keyboard and then at the floor. Gerald said nothing. The second vice president, a woman named Sandra who had been with the company 6 years and had a remarkable talent for remaining composed under pressure, turned to Isabella and said, very quietly, that they should probably follow whatever Marcus told them to do. Isabella said yes. She said it without any remaining resistance, because the resistance had run out somewhere around the moment she had watched Gerald's face when he said, "Marcus warned you," and she had understood that he was right, and that she had known he was right even in the elevator when she had looked at Marcus and decided not to write it down. Marcus told her about the server array. He explained what it contained and what it would mean if the group reached it before law enforcement could breach the building. He explained that the external SWAT team had been effectively pinned by a secondary element of the operation, 2 vehicles blocking the building's main access points in a configuration that was stalling the breach approach. He had perhaps 20 minutes before either the group completed their extraction or the SWAT team found an alternate entry. He said there was a manual lockdown protocol for sub-level 1, a physical system, entirely separate from the AI network, installed during the building's original construction and never decommissioned because the insurance underwriters had required it as a condition of the vault's certification. It required simultaneous activation from 2 points: a physical panel in the basement infrastructure hub and a software override in the control room. He said he could reach the panel. He said she would need to manage the override from her end. Marcus told her about the server array. He explained what it contained and what it would mean if the group reached it before law enforcement could breach the building. He explained that the external SWAT team had been effectively pinned by a secondary element of the operation, 2 vehicles blocking the building's main access points in a configuration that was stalling the breach approach. He had perhaps 20 minutes before either the group completed their extraction or the SWAT team found an alternate entry. He said there was a manual lockdown protocol for sub-level 1, a physical system entirely separate from the AI network installed during the building's original construction and never decommissioned because the insurance underwriters had required it as a condition of the vault's certification. It required simultaneous activation from 2 points: a physical panel in the basement infrastructure hub and a software override in the control room. He said he could reach the panel. He said she would need to manage the override from her end. She said, "Tell her what to do." He told her. He also told her about Richard Calloway. He told her what he had heard on the radio, the voice, the cadence, the administrative precision of a man giving operational instructions to people he had hired and briefed thoroughly. He told her where to find the corroborating documents. The vendor access logs from the past 14 months, cross-referenced against the IT request irregularity, he had flagged and documented in his notebook and subsequently transferred to the building's internal complaint system on the night a facilities manager had dismissed it. He gave her the file number. He had memorized it, the way he memorized most things he considered potentially important. Ross, who had been listening, immediately pulled the file. It was there. It had always been there, sitting in the system, waiting for someone to look at it. Isabella looked at the file number on Ross's screen for a moment. Then she looked at Sandra. Sandra looked at the screen. Neither of them said anything, because the specific quality of silence that follows the discovery that something preventable happened because the right person was not listened to does not generally call for words. What followed in the next 11 minutes was, by any reasonable measure, not the kind of thing Isabella Laurent had expected to spend a Tuesday evening doing. She had expected, in the abstract way that people expect unpleasant possibilities, that running a major corporation might involve crises. She had not expected to be lying on the floor of the control room with her phone screen as a flashlight, reading alphanumeric override codes off a laminated card that Ross had found taped to the inside of a panel that none of them had known existed, while a man she had fired 2 hours earlier fought his way through the sub-basement of her building to reach a panel that she had also not known existed. She read the codes carefully. Ross entered them carefully. They did not speak much. There was not a great deal to say. Marcus moved through the service corridor on basement level 1, with the particular focused quietness of someone who has spent a long time moving through difficult spaces. His flashlight was off. He did not need it. He had walked this corridor in complete darkness enough times to know where the pipe junction was, where the floor sloped slightly left, where the access panel sat 3 feet below the main junction box. He could hear the group on the other side of the vault door, 4 of them now, working on the secondary lock with equipment that was impressive and would eventually work but had not yet. He could hear one of them on comms, talking to someone who was not in the room. The voice was measured, familiar frequency. He placed it after a moment, the measured administrative cadence of someone who spent most of their professional life on conference calls. He had heard that voice in this building before. The chief operating officer of Laurent Group was named Richard Calloway. He had been with the company for 9 years, had an office on the 16th floor with a view of the river, and had been, for the past 14 months, systematically negotiating the sale of the company's most sensitive client data to a consortium of private buyers, operating through a chain of shell entities in 3 different countries. The diamond showcase had been his idea not as a theft target but as a cover. The chaos, the attention, the obvious motive, it pointed everyone toward the vault and the stones, while the real extraction happened on the server array 2 rooms away. It was, Marcus thought, entering the code for the manual lockdown panel, as Isabella's voice read the final sequence through his earpiece. Genuinely clever. It was also, he thought, turning the physical key that his old notebook had told him was taped to the back of the junction box 11 years ago during the original installation. Too clever by exactly the amount that very intelligent people sometimes are. The lockdown engaged with the sound of something enormous and decisive titanium bolts, driving into reinforced housing on every access point of sublevel 1, triggered simultaneously from the panel in the basement and the override in the control room. The vault door, which had been 30 seconds from yielding to the group's equipment, locked into a configuration that would require either the specific deactivation codes or a cutting team in 3 hours they did not have. The server room sealed. The emergency lighting shifted from red to white, and through his radio, Marcus heard Isabella Laurent exhale a long, unsteady breath that carried in it everything the previous 2 hours had cost her and say, in a voice that was not entirely steady, that she had got it. He did not have time to answer. The man who had been on the radio, a large, composed man whose tactical vest carried no identifying markings and whose movements suggested formal military training, had come around the corner of the corridor with a weapon already raised. Marcus had 4 seconds and no firearm, and the contents of a maintenance corridor that had been stocked 11 years ago by people who had assumed it would be accessed only by technicians. He used 2 of those seconds to think, and the remaining 2 to move, and what resulted was not elegant, but it worked, and the man was on the floor, and Marcus's left side hurt, in a way that suggested at least 2 cracked ribs, and he sat against the wall in the white emergency light and breathed carefully. Before the lockdown had fully engaged, there had been a moment, a narrow, critical window of approximately 4 minutes, when the group's leader had realized what was happening. He was fast, that much was clear. He had assessed the situation with the compressed, efficient logic of someone whose entire value to the operation was the ability to adapt quickly, and he had moved to the one resource still available to him: Isabella. He had found her in the control room before the titanium door sealed it. He had taken her to the 8th floor landing, where the stairwell created a natural, defensible position, and he had pressed the muzzle of his weapon to the back of her shoulder and spoken calmly into his radio, telling Marcus, because he had identified Marcus by then, had probably known about Marcus from Calloway's briefing, and had chosen to underestimate him in the way that people who have done everything correctly often underestimate the one variable they dismissed, that the lockdown needed to be reversed, or the woman was going to have a very bad evening. Marcus had heard this through Isabella's open radio channel. He had also heard Lily's ringtone on his personal phone, which he had silenced but not dismissed. He had called her back 20 seconds later, from the stairwell 2 floors below where Isabella was being held. Lily answered on the first ring. She said "Dad" in the voice that meant she had been awake and waiting. He asked if she was okay. She said yes. She said she had been watching the news. He said he was fine. She said she knew she had said that. He said he loved her. She said she loved him, and that he should probably go handle whatever he was handling. He said that was exactly right. He ended the call and climbed the stairs. The conversation on the 8th floor landing was brief. The group leader told Marcus to put down whatever he had, which was not much but was enough for the geometry of the space. Marcus set it on the floor. He looked at Isabella, who was standing very straight with the particular stillness of someone who has decided that showing fear is not an option she is willing to exercise. Her chin was level. Her eyes were clear. He thought, with the disinterested observation of someone cataloging a situation, that she was considerably braver than she had probably needed to be up to this point in her life, and that it was a quality that had perhaps been waiting for the appropriate occasion. The group leader said that Marcus seemed like a reasonable man. Marcus said he had been told that. The group leader said that reasonable men understood when a situation had reached its conclusion. He said that Marcus had done something impressive, genuinely, and that under different circumstances he might have had use for someone with his particular abilities. Marcus said he doubted it. The group leader asked whether Marcus would actually die for a woman who had fired him 2 hours ago. Marcus said he would not characterize it that way. He said that his daughter deserved to grow up in a world where people who could help each other did, even when it was inconvenient, and that if enough people made that choice consistently, the world became slightly more worth living in, which was the only inheritance he had anything to pass on. The group leader stared at him. Isabella, behind him, said nothing. But something shifted in her expression that Marcus caught in his peripheral vision. The group leader said that was a remarkable thing to say. Marcus said it was just what he thought. Then Isabella slammed her elbow backward with everything she had, and Marcus moved, and the titanium door on the sublevel sealed with a sound like a mountain settling, and the man hit the floor of the landing and did not immediately get up. Upstairs, Isabella had opened the intercom network, the building-wide system used for fire drills and evacuation announcements, and was speaking into it clearly and without hesitation. She named Richard Calloway. She described what he had done and what he had attempted to do. She read from the documents Ross had located on the internal drive. Once the server room lockdown had secured the data, the specific account numbers and transaction records that Calloway had compiled over 14 months of preparation. She read them calmly and precisely into every speaker in every room and corridor and elevator lobby in the building, so that every person who could hear, and some of them had phones, and some of those phones were recording, understood exactly what had happened and who had made it happen. Calloway, who had been moving toward the building's secondary exit, stopped walking when he heard his name. He stood in the 8th-floor stairwell for a moment. Then he sat down on the stairs and waited, because there was nothing else left to do. The SWAT breach came 7 minutes later, through the loading dock on the north side, the same door, with the faulty latch that Marcus had noted in his files years ago, which did not latch properly in cold weather, and which the breach team found, when they reached it, had been left propped open by a folded piece of cardboard. Marcus had placed the cardboard there on his way in. The medics found him in the basement corridor, sitting against the wall with his radio in his lap, and his notebook open to the page where he had written, 3 days ago, a description of a van near the loading dock, and a man with eyes that moved the wrong way. He was treated for the ribs, and a laceration on his forearm, and a bruise across his shoulder that was already turning the deep purple of something serious. He declined the stretcher. He asked one of the officers if he could borrow a phone to call his daughter, and the officer said, of course, and Marcus dialed the number and listened to it ring twice before Lily picked up and said Dad with the exact tone of someone who has been trying very hard not to be worried. He told her he was fine. She said she knew. She said she had always known he was going to be fine, because he was the most careful person she had ever met. He said, thank you, Bug. She said, come home. He said soon. Isabella found him outside the building 20 minutes later, when the ambulance crew had finished their assessment, and the police had finished their initial statements, and the rain had slowed to a fine, cold mist. She was wearing a jacket that someone had given her, and her hair was damp, and she looked, for the first time since Marcus had known her, like a person rather than a position. She stood in front of him and did not say anything for a moment. He waited. He was good at waiting. She said she was sorry. She said it simply and directly. The way someone says a thing when they have already decided they are going to mean it. He said he understood. She said she didn't think that covered it. He said it covered enough. She looked at him for another moment. She said he had been right about the vault. She said he had been right about the cameras and the contractor and the override and the loading dock door, and probably about several other things she had not yet had time to identify. He said the door was a facilities issue, not a security one, and that the facilities manager had the paperwork. She almost smiled. He did not quite smile, but something in his face shifted slightly in that direction. The weeks that followed were, from Marcus's perspective, somewhat bewildering. The story reached the press within 24 hours and expanded steadily outward. From there, the fired security guard, the diamond heist, the $500 million data scheme, the single father who had returned to a building that had humiliated him and prevented its total collapse from the inside, alone, with a flashlight and a paper notebook and 11 years of paying attention. Journalists used words like hero and vigilante, and old school and several other things that Marcus found mildly embarrassing. A photograph of him taken outside the building that night. His jacket gone, his arm bandaged. His face doing the expression it always did, which was calm and slightly tired, ran in 2 national publications and on the front page of the city paper. Lily cut it out and taped it to the refrigerator with a piece of clear tape and told him it was going to stay there forever. He said she could probably find a better use for the refrigerator space. She said she could not. Laurent Group offered him a settlement figure that he declined to disclose, but that his neighbor, who was a paralegal and had overheard part of one phone call, estimated was significant. The board voted to retain Isabella as CEO after she delivered a presentation on what had happened, what had been discovered about Calloway's scheme, and what structural changes she was implementing in response. She was precise about it, the way she was precise about most things, but the precision had something different in it now, a kind of deliberateness, as though she was checking each statement against something internal before she allowed it out. Richard Calloway was arrested on 9 federal counts. The group he had hired was in custody. The client data had not been accessed. The diamonds, somewhat anticlimactically, "We're fine." Isabella called Marcus 2 weeks after the night of the exhibition. She asked if he would come to the building. He went. She met him in the lobby, not the conference room, not her office, but the lobby, in front of the front desk and the revolving art installation and the marble floors he had walked for 11 years, and she offered him the position of head of security for Laurent Group, a complete redesign of the building's security infrastructure, a seat at the executive table for facility risk decisions, and an equity stake in the company that was. He understood when she handed him the summary document, not a token gesture. He read the document. He looked at her. He said he needed to think about it. He went home. He made dinner. He and Lily ate at the kitchen table. And she told him about her day, a test she had done well on, a disagreement with a friend that had been resolved, a book she was reading about a girl who discovered she could talk to animals, and he listened to all of it with the full attention he gave everything. And when she had finished, he told her about the offer. She was quiet for a moment, turning her fork over in her hand. She asked if he wanted to go back. He said he was thinking about it. She asked what he was thinking. He said he was thinking that there was a version of going back that made sense, and a version that did not. She asked what made the difference. He said the conditions. She said what conditions? He said the ones that made it more than just a title. He called Isabella the next morning. He told her he would accept the position on 2 conditions. The first was that no member of the building's operational or maintenance staff would face further workforce reductions without a full review process in which he had a voice. The second was that the facilities manager who had dismissed his original security report be given the option to review and respond, rather than be terminated, because the man had been working from incomplete information, and that was a systems failure, not a character failure. Isabella was quiet for a moment on her end. He waited. She said those were fair conditions. He said he thought so. She said yes to both. He said he would see her Monday. He arrived on Monday morning, not the evening. The morning in his car with the 212,000 miles and the passenger side mirror and the blue thermos and his notebook in his jacket pocket. He had spent the weekend doing the ordinary things he did every weekend. Making breakfast, taking Lily to the library, fixing a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink that had been leaking intermittently for 6 weeks and that he had not had time to address properly until now. Lily had sat beside him on the kitchen floor and handed him tools from the toolbox and asked questions about plumbing with the same methodical curiosity she applied to everything. And he had answered all of them, and it had been, he thought, an extremely good Saturday. Sunday had been quieter. He had sat on the back porch in the afternoon with a cup of coffee and his notebook, and had written, in his neat, compressed hand, a preliminary assessment of the Laurent building's security vulnerabilities, not because anyone had asked him to yet, but because the habit of seeing and recording was too deep to suppress, and because he had already started thinking about what the new infrastructure would need to look like. He had filled 6 pages before Lily came out to tell him dinner was ready. He walked through the revolving glass door and across the marble lobby and past the front desk, where the woman with the photograph of her grandchildren looked up and said, "Welcome back, Mr. Reed." He said, "Thank you, Marie." He said he hoped she had a good weekend. She said she had, and that her eldest granddaughter had lost her second tooth. And she had a photograph of that too, now. He said, "Congratulations." The lobby was fuller than usual, because word had come around that he was returning, and people had arranged to be in the lobby at that hour, for various invented reasons that fooled no one. He walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the 14th floor. Before the doors closed, he heard it begin a single pair of hands, then another, then the whole lobby, the sound building the way sounds build in a large marble space, warm and full and slightly echoing. Gerald was there. Leaning on the front desk, his heart condition apparently no obstacle to showing up before 8 in the morning when the occasion called for it. Priya from guest relations was there. Carl from the kitchen was there. His arm in a bandage that would be gone in another 2 weeks. Tasha from the front desk evening shift was there, even though she was not scheduled until 3. Derek was not there, but nobody noticed his absence. Marcus stood in the elevator and looked at the floor numbers ascending and felt, with the quiet certainty of a man who had learned a long time ago not to confuse recognition with worth, but was perhaps, today, willing to allow himself the small grace of acknowledging that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Lily had asked him once what it meant to be brave. He had said he thought it meant doing what needed to be done even when nobody was watching, and especially when you had good reason not to. She had thought about this very seriously, the way she thought about most things, and said she thought that sounded about right. He thought about that now, in the elevator, rising toward a floor he had walked many times and would walk many more, not because the building was his, not because the title meant he had won something, but because the woman at the front desk had a photograph in her pocket, and the man in accounting still held the elevator, and the janitor on the 6th floor still sang quietly to himself while he worked. They were still here. They were still worth protecting. That had never been a complicated calculation. It was just the one he kept making. Every day, because someone had to, and he was, it turned out, very good at it.